Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar, Automating 1042 and 1042S Filing, Tools, Bulk E-Filing, and Best Practices. We are your hosts for today. My name is William Binkley. I'm a TaxBandits Customer Support Specialist, and joined with me is Desmond Morrison.
Hello, everybody. How's everyone today?
He's also a TaxBandits Customer Support Specialist, and we'll be going over the 1042 and 1042Ss. Just to get started, some of the topics that we'll explore are what are the 1042S and 1042, some things that are needed for both, filing requirements, and then common filing mistakes and tips that'll be very important for your filings.
Alrighty, looks like we got a full agenda ahead of us today.
Yep. Just to start out with understanding the forms, we'll go over like what they report, who typically files, the purpose of them, and how they're kind of connected. So starting off, what does the 1042S report? Form 1042S is the foreign person's U.S. source income subject to withholding. It's used to report U.S. source income paid to foreign individuals that is subject to withholding under Chapter 3 or Chapter 4. This includes things like interest, dividends, rents, royalties, compensations, pretty much anything that would be kind of similar to like a 1099, anything that's paid out for that. And going into like the different chapters, that usually kind of determines what kind of withholding happens there.
So Will, by foreign individuals, what do you mean by that?
That's a good question. Typically, that would be anybody who is not, the term is known as a non-resident alien. So anybody who is not from the US, who's not a citizen, and who's not a current resident of the US. That also applies to entities as well. So if there's any foreign companies, they might be considered under that, that term.
Essentially, this form is just reporting the income made by these foreign individuals to the IRS.
Right. Any income paid to them and any withholding that was taken out from those payments. Who files the Form 1042S? It's typically filed by withholding agents who pay U.S. source income. So for example, that could be employers, financial institutions, universities, corporations, pretty much any entity or business or firms that makes payments to these individuals. The IRS is just looking to make sure that that's getting reported, and any withholding that is, any payments that are subject to withholding also get reported, and they're just trying to see like where that withholding is going as well.
So essentially, like a university like Harvard sending their income to foreign exchange students or just students.
Not really like Harvard paying the student, but like if they have a scholarship, right. If whoever is administering the scholarship to a foreign student, or using the example of Harvard, maybe if they have a teacher who's doing like online courses,
gotcha.
And they're getting paid for that service. That could be one instance where a 1042S would be administered. And the general purpose for the 1042S, again, just tracking the payment and reporting what was paid to an individual or a company. Reporting any withholding that is subject to Chapter 3 or Chapter 4 withholding, along with the codes associated with that for any exemptions. And it can also be used to report other withholding agents, intermediaries, and payers who might have had a hand in distributing the payment to the recipient. Since you're dealing with foreign individuals and companies and different tax rates, there might be a middleman who you would send the payments through, and that would need to be reported on the 1042S as well. Typically, the IRS is just trying to see like who has a hand in getting the payment to the recipient, and they just need to see like every place that that payment goes through, who had the withholding, who was in charge of keeping track of the liability and withholding to make sure that all income that needs to be withheld, any taxes that need to be withheld, actually get taken out and paid. Especially with the withholding agents, intermediaries, and payers. That's especially important for the 1042 reporting purposes, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
So what is Form 1042?
The 1042 is the annual withholding tax return for U.S. source income of foreign persons. The IRS tax form is used to report taxes withheld on certain income paid to foreign persons or entities. Pretty much it's just like a summary of everything that has been paid out. There's various boxes where it'll say like income, but then specific types of incomes like substitute dividend payments or like derivatives, anything where there's any kind of like investments, any credits as well. And these are typically filed by anybody who administers a 1042-S as well. Because it's kind of just like I said, it's just summarizing everything that's been reported previously, just in total on one form.
Oh, that makes sense. So anyone who files a 1042-S, they need to compile all that information onto the 1042.
Right.
Awesome.
And that's really just how that relationship goes with the 1042-S and the 1042. Like you said, anybody who files a 1042-S, that would need to be included on the 1042. If you're just filing one, you'll still put the total information, but if you're filing like 100, all that totaled information will need to be reported, especially if there's different cases like substitute dividend payments versus like scholarships, anything that's paid out. It will all be compiled in. There's different categories and different boxes that explain a lot of that information. And then going into the next section about what's needed for both, we'll kind of take a step back of what comes before the 1042 and 1042-S, and then kind of what some of the different things that you wouldn't normally see on like a 1099 or W-2, what that would entail for a 1042-S, like income and exemption codes, treaty information, information from intermediaries, individuals, and payers.
So the W-8, is that similar to the W-9 for 1099 contractors?
Right. The W-8 is the withholding form where you would gather the information necessary to report the types of payments and like kind of that person, what that person or individual or entity, they would give you the information so you kind of know what to withhold. And if there's anything special, like a special exemption or any treaty information, that would be applicable to them and maybe their country of residence or where they live. The W-8 is a little different in that there's different types, like the W-8BENE, ECI, IMY. They're used for different things, like they're listed below right here. W-8BEN is for beneficial owner. Typically, that's for the DAP income or fixed determinable annual or periodic income paid to just a person. The W-8BENE beneficial owner is the entity. So if it's a company, effectively connected income, this is an important distinction because that could be for services like done physically in the US, or if an entity has like a physical location that's receiving the money within the US. Intermediary would be just kind of to explain that they are moving the money and they're having a hand. That's just like their classification. And the tax exempt organization, in case there's any like foreign nonprofits or like trust or partnerships that might have tax exempt status in their country and how that might impact things with payments from the US.
Much like the W-9, the W-8 just reports how the 1042-S recipient gets withheld on their income that they receive throughout the year or throughout their the time.
Mainly like their classification, how they should have income withheld, any taxes withheld, and any specific like treaty agreements, and then Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 information, because a lot of that is used to determine like what the withholding amount is. And then, like I said, with the chapter 3 and chapter 4, this typically goes into like how they are taxed and how the payments can be, like what is withheld and how the payments are applied. So chapter 3, anything that's withheld under chapter 3 is considered to be fixed, determinable, annual, or periodic income. A lot of cases, this is just like a standard payment to an individual or entity. Chapter 4 is the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act. This is more for making sure that any institutions or entities are compliant with US reporting standards, and that if they have all of the information and necessary documentation, that either they might not get penalized or they might get like pretty much like there's not a withholding rate, or they might be penalized if they're not up to code.
Right. So it's important to have all of this information. Would they be able to store it within TaxBandits?
Yeah, with TaxBandits, a lot of the information is saved for future purposes, and also just adding in with the address book. We'll get into that a little bit with the income and exemption codes, because there's certain, there's a few different codes, but like I said, we'll get into that a little later. Right. And then with income and exemption codes, once you've received the W-8, that kind of will explain like how a person is classified with the US. And whenever you start the 1042S, I always compare it to the 1099, because a lot of the income codes that you see are related more to related to like dividend, interest, and other payments you might see on like a 1099 DIV, 1099 INT, or even like a 1099 miscellaneous. The income categories are divided into 3. There's dividend, interest, and other. And then certain codes and income types may require certain boxes to be filled. There might be like if you select a certain one, for example, like scholarships and grants, there might be a withholding allowance that might lower the taxable amount. So certain boxes may require, certain codes may require certain boxes, and that might affect like what the withholding is. So it's important to know like what kind of payment you're making, and where that falls into, like how it should be withheld and the amounts associated with that. And then we get into status codes versus exemption codes. So chapter 3 and chapter 4 status pretty much just reflects like the type of entity. So chapter 3 has a few categories, and chapter 4 has a few other categories more related to compliance. So chapter 3 is just kind of like a general, like how is this person or this company identified? It could be an individual, it could be a corporation. There could be just a few examples, a US branch with ECI, effectively connected income, presumption applied. Chapter 4 is more for the compliance, so like a non-participating foreign financial institution, or FFI, or an active NFFE, non-financial foreign entity. And then the exemption codes are more so the explanations for how the recipient is taxed, and like why that rate would be applicable, or like under what code that rate is applicable for.
Are there scenarios where you might need to include a chapter 3 code versus a chapter 4 code on the 1042S form?
Well, with that there's always going to be boxes filled in with those. A common thing is sometimes people might try to leave them blank, and maybe with paper filing, that might have been accepted, but like with e-filing and compliance, a lot of times like the IRS instructions will say like boxes need to be filled in. And so typically like there's usually a code that might say, might be in chapter 4, for example. There's one that says payee not subject to chapter 4 withholding. So programs like TaxBandits typically like stop people and let them know like, hey, you might need to input this. Or with Chapter 3, pretty much like if it's one, usually it's not going to be the other. But there might be cases where you might have to file two different types of 1042Ss, especially if it's like different payments as well.
Right. So I bet it's really important to really know the difference and the importance of knowing your status codes and your exemption codes.
Yep. And some of the exemption codes that I've got some few examples below are like the effectively connected income. So anything that's done within the US or coming from the US might be withheld differently, or if there's like a tax treaty, it could just be exempt altogether with no withholding.
Right.
Chapter 4 would be like a grandfathered payment or an excluded non-financial payment. There's various codes. Even with Chapter 3, there's even a code that's like this pay is subject to Chapter 4.
Right.
So there's a lot of explanations and a lot of fun ways the IRS likes to confuse people.
Yes, yes.
Treaty information with the W-8s, typically if there's any specific treaties between the country, there's usually like an article that will come into play, kind of explain like why they'll receive an exemption, or kind of like explaining how they should be taxed for the work that they're doing. And usually that's entered on the W-8. So it's especially important to know, important to have that W-8 before you start.
Gotcha. So essentially a treaty is just an agreement or some type of rule just explaining why this recipient's being taxed a certain way, correct?
More so like why they should be, why the company should withhold a certain amount or like not have, or have an exemption altogether. And then information from individuals, intermediaries, and payers. There's a little bit hinted at this prior to, or like in the beginning of the webinar. But on the 1042S, there are specific pages where, or not pages, but specific boxes, I'm sorry, where since you're dealing with foreign individuals and entities, there might be other hands that are moving the payment around before it ends up to the actual recipient or the intended recipient for that payment. So the IRS wants to know like where that information, where that payment is going, who is receiving that, who is passing it on to who, and that's where these boxes will come in. Typically, you'll see them like on the right side of the 1042S, and it'll ask for information specific to the entity that you're working with. It could be another withholding agent who's assuming the responsibility and liability of withholding the actual taxes. It could just be a flow-through entity or another intermediary. And with that, you would need to have like specific information also associated with like the W-8, where maybe it'll have their TIN and EIN, or what's known as a GIN number, or Global Intermediary Identification Number. A lot of times that kind of helps with like understanding the compliance, especially with like Chapter 4. But this is mainly more for reporting like the payment, where it's going, and making sure that you have like all the right information, who's the actual like recipient, who is having the money like pass through them before it gets to the recipient, whether it's like an entity or an individual who's operating like a qualified intermediary, for example.
Do I need to have a intermediary when reporting my 1042S information to the IRS?
Not necessarily. It's just that some people might have different, depending on like how they're operating with the payments and like where it's going, they might use an intermediary, or like they might use an intermediary to help assume the withholding liability and responsibility. So they just kind of hand them the money. They handle all the withholding, almost like just having like a CPA or so, kind of just handling all that, the accounting and withholding information for you. And then filing requirements, just kind of general overview with this. The IRS is mandating more forms to be e-filed. As we continue, the IRS is wanting a lot more forms to be strictly filed electronically. And even if you are still paper filing, if you have like a combined, typically like if you're filing more than 10 forms of any kind, whether it's just one 1042S and like 9 1099s or whatever the combination may be, they typically want you to e-file and are trying to require that all of the forms be e-filed.
Mhm.
The 1042S and 1042 deadline is typically March 15th. If it's a weekend or a holiday, that can impact this date. This year it's March 16th. And that's also the same for the form distribution. So for example, if you are if you need to mail a copy out, a lot of times like the IRS requires any form that has like a recipient copy, like W-2, 1099, 1042S, that must be mailed out by the deadline date. With this, it has to be mailed out by March 15th, or in this case, March 16th.
And with TaxBandits, I can take care of both of those deadlines at the same time for those forms?
Yes. With you can either distribute it via postal mail or a secure online portal, where recipients can choose to accept the form that way and download it, and they'll always have access, or postal mail where TaxBandits will handle the actual mailing of the form with the appropriate, like everything's like stamped properly, and yeah.
Awesome.
And then going into like some common filing mistakes, each year the IRS sees a series of common errors made by withholding agents that can easily be corrected. Errors can cause delays in processing, may even cause rejection of the form, or may even cause like certain statuses. For example, like unknown recipients. It's important. That's kind of why it's important to have a lot of this information beforehand, so you can minimize this as much as possible.
Is there a way for 1042S filers to mark that they don't have that necessary recipient information?
Yes. Typically on like something like a 1099, there might be a TIN not provided option. With the 1042S, there can be, there's an unknown recipient like code. Along with that, some other examples would be like a 1042 versus 1042S mismatch. If anything is not properly showing, that could cause some issues, or you might get an IRS letter asking for more information regarding your filings. Using different income or exemption codes, missing or incorrect TINs. So if you haven't received a TIN from the recipient, that might be required for specific benefits or exemption just altogether. That could cause some issues. And then there could also be an accepted with errors status. Essentially, there are the 1042S can be filed through like the IRIS system, which is a new e-filing platform that the IRS is using. And with that, it's kind of just acknowledging that you did the filing part, but the information related to the TIN and the name combination could be not matching the IRS records.
So essentially the IRS is saying the form has been accepted, but there's an error with the reported name and the corresponding TIN combination.
Right, and that could just be a matter of the TIN being off by one number. That could be maybe the TIN is correct, but the name is different. So for example, like if there was Desmond LLC,
right,
but you filed as Desmond Incorporated or Desmond Inc., that could be one thing, or even just as Desmond, rather than the full legal name that you were registered with. That could be cause for the accepted with errors status.
right.
And then there are some tips in regards to the just like general filing. Obviously, everything that's been discussed today is definitely going to be more helpful with getting started and just going forward with filing 1042Ss. We recommend implementing tips like making sure you collect any W-8 forms, getting all of that ahead of time as soon as you can, organizing all the 1042S documentation, and reconciling all withholding deposits, any payments that have already been made.
Are there any services that they could use to ensure that the recipient information is as accurate as possible before filing?
Yeah, that would be the next point with TIN matching. So if you have a TIN from a specific recipient, you can, TaxBandits offers TIN matching where you can have the TIN go through the IRS system. It'll check the name and TIN combination and let you know that if it's accurate or if it's if something's not matching with the IRS records.
Nice.
On top of that, whenever you start filing, especially within TaxBandits, double check the information that you are entering, and you can check the draft copies as well, just to kind of see how a preview of how your forms will look. Bulk filing, you can ensure that whenever you are uploading multiple forms at the same time. So for example, TaxBandits offers the template where you can fill it in to CSV file. You can go through that information, put everything in the boxes so you get all of your recipients done at once. Make sure all of the headers and boxes are filled in properly, that everything is lined up in the correct columns. A lot of times, any issues that you occur when uploading a bulk file, that's typically something that might be flagged when you're manually filing. Like if you left something out, like an address, or if you used a specific code and you didn't fill in a certain box. A lot of times when you upload that, it'll flag it and say like, oh, there's something that's up with this.
So when manually filing, that's good when you have maybe a few 1042S recipients to file for. But if I was a high volume withholding agent with multiple recipients to file for, the bulk filing route will be the best option for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. And this is recorded. You will be emailed a link, and please join us again for the next webinar.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
Have a great day.